Hello and welcome back to the DrEnderPickles show. Today we have a very special guest, a faction leader, a group leader, Deloaded. Hello, Deloaded. How are you doing?
Hey guys, great to
Awesome.
be here.
So D, I just want to go ahead and get started. When did you come up with Don Fuhrer? When did that idea kind of spark in your mind? Because I mean, obviously, when people think of you, that's what they're most associating you with.
Yeah. Honestly, I mean, it goes way back. I started the group in 2013, and we could talk a little bit more about that if you want. But like the name, I kind of just made it up, and it was one of my friends who said that he's like, oh, that means father's gift in German. You know, this guy unfortunately was failing his German classes though, so it doesn't actually mean that.
Wait,
But yeah,
what does it actually mean though?
it
Does it
actually
stand for
means
anything?
no. It means it actually kind of doesn't mean anything. It just sounds
Nice.
cool.
Wait, what's the actual word for father's gift then?
Vaters Greshnik or something.
Yeah, that sounds way less cool than Don Fuhrer.
Oh yeah, it's completely different. So yeah, I just kind of came up with a name that sounded cool, and I wanted it to be sort of like I don't know, like I sort of took inspiration from like Lord of the Rings. There's a lot of cities in Lord of the Rings that have like two-part names, like Minas Tirith, or what's another one? Anyway, there are a bunch of cities in that universe that have like two-part names, like two words that are like mashed together. So I'm like, okay, Dawn, Fury. I guess like I
Yeah,
just
it
mashed.
sounds like more ancient, more regal. It's like someone who has like two first names.
Right, right. So that's the idea behind the name. The group itself, ultimately, it was just when it started, it was just me and my buddy on his little server that he was hosting. You know, had a population of maybe 15 people, something like that. And the first couple bases that we did were all on that server.
Yeah,
And
and
it wasn't until later that we
you said that was
branched
around
out.
2013 when you started doing that.
Yeah, August 2013.
And so what was kind of the state of the game during the time when you started? What update were they on back then?
Uh, it's shoot. I think it was around the time that jungle biomes were added, or
Nice.
maybe they were recently added. Because I remember the server we were playing on had two worlds. It had one that was an older version, and then it had a new world that was made specifically for jungle biomes.
And
So it was
had you kind of always seen yourself as a leader? Like had you always kind of like envisioned yourself leading some sort of group like this? Or was it just kind of something that you fell into?
at the start, no, no. At the start, I was really a co-leader at the start because there was another guy named Ben who I knew him IRL. Me and him were good friends, and we actually started the group together. He no longer plays. He left after Dawn Fuhrer 7, but
So
yeah.
he never
So
even made it to 2B, did he?
no, he didn't.
He stopped like about two. Was it like two Don Fuhrers before? Three maybe.
Yeah, yeah, too. Because well, we 10 was the first one on 2B. So yeah, but I started the group originally with him, and it was like our project, and it was like, wouldn't it be funny if we just named our next base like the same thing, you know? Um, it was kind of an act of defiance originally because the people who blew it up the first time were like, they were like really mean, and it's like, oh, you'll never survive, and it's like, we're just gonna build a new one and call it the same thing. How do you like that? Like, that's kind of how it started.
Yeah, and so what kind of prompted the initial move for you from that original private server to Where did you go next after that? Like at what point and when did you kind of make that move, and where to?
So Dawn Fuhr 1 through 5 was on that server. And then basically I kind of got tired of like my friend's admin abuse. So I'm like, I need to find a different server to go play on. And it was all factions back then. Like the most popular genre of server back in 2013, 2014 was like factions. And it wasn't the style of factions that you see today, where it's like giant obsidian boxes with like, I don't know, ridiculous, overpowered stuff. Like shields weren't in the game. Golden apples were just like, no one had those.
Yeah, there's a little bit more skill involved. You couldn't just keep chugging like gaps and stuff like that, I guess. A
Yeah,
little bit more
exactly.
expertise needed, a little bit more knowledge of the game.
Exactly. And everyone back then, I think, was at least everyone on the servers I played on were pretty bad. Like, just generally speaking, pretty bad at the game in comparison to nowadays. Uh, so it was a much simpler time. And so, but in any case, I went to a different server called Toastcraft, and Dawn Fuhr 6 and 7 were on that server. And then uh, Dawn Fuhr 8 was on a server called. Actually, it was a server that didn't really have a name. It was so small that the IP address was just numbers. It didn't like have a name. Um, and then 9 was on a server called Mozart Realms, and that's where I met Hermetic Lock. But the early history of Dawn Fuhr is like it's very interesting because it's just a handful of people struggling, and we actually had pretty much the same enemies all the way up through Dawn Fuhr, all the way up to Dawn Fuhr 8. We had like the same group of enemies. They would these guys. I mean, honestly, they're actually like it wasn't really that intense of a rivalry. Like we were actually sort of on and off friends. But there was a bunch of guys who were called the Highwaymen, quote unquote. And when they found out that I had left to a different server, they actually followed me to that server, and the battle continued.
Yeah, what ended up
Uh,
happening to them? Did they just kind of all quit, or when did they give up their stalking?
because I finally defeated them using the power
Whoa,
of
in what way?
I used the power of admin abuse to finally destroy them.
Well, doesn't that I mean kind of contradict what you were saying when you said you left because of someone else's admin abuse? You kind of did the same thing.
Yes.
Did the hero turn into the villain, or was this before the admin abuse was used on you?
Sorry, what?
Did you kind of abuse power before this like power was abused against you, or was this as a response? Was this afterwards?
No, so on that first server, uh, that where Dawn Fear 1 through 5 was, it was owned by my good friend, and even though he co-founded Dawn Fear with me, he would kind of like flip flop, and sometimes he'd be like admin abusing, and he would like give people overpowered stuff, and he would help the bad guy side or whatever, and then sometimes he would admin abuse and help me, and I'm like, this is too ridiculous. Like, I need to go somewhere where that doesn't happen. It wasn't until Dawn Fear 8 where I quote unquote defeated the Highwaymen, because what happened was I ended up becoming like an admin, like one of the top admins on this server. So when the Highwaymen showed up to the server to try to attack Dawn Fear again, I was like, oh yeah, well now I'm the one who gets to admin abuse, and
Nice.
they
So
they
it
ended up
wasn't
having to.
it wasn't like you got abused against afterwards, like karma or anything like that. You kind of just used the same tactic that had been used long before.
Yeah, exactly. And bear in mind, all of that was like when I was like a high schooler.
Yeah, but I mean that's kind of the stuff that sticks with you the most, right? Those experiences that you have when you're younger, because I feel like our minds back then are so open to absorb those experiences in a different way than we do now. I feel like now we kind of absorb it just kind of at a face value. It's all very literal activities, very realistic about it. But back then, I mean, you trap yourself in this fantasy world that unfortunately I feel like a lot of us grow out of
Yeah,
when we grow up on this game.
it was definitely, a fantasy, kind of an escapism experience. And I think 2B is that way as well for a lot of people. So, but
Yeah, and speaking of 2B, tell me a little bit about how you met Hermetic Lock and how he kind of convinced you to join 2B.
so I joined in 2016. I joined a faction server called Mozart Realms. This was a pretty small faction server. I mean, it had maybe 100 players total, probably 20 online at any one given time. And I joined with the intention of building another city. And I met Hermetic Lock. He was leading a group called Imagination. And basically, I started talking to him. I hit it off with him immediately. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to build this city. I've done it a bunch in the past. Maybe you should come along for the ride. You can like protect me while I'm building. And me and him became really, really good friends over the course of that summer and, the few months where we were playing. I mean, we would VC every single night. This is back before Discord was a thing. We would literally talk on like Skype. Um, and what ended up happening with that was, while that was going on, we started to see these videos go viral on YouTube, the Rusher videos. Both me and Herm are watching the videos and we're like, wow, this is really interesting. This looks like a cool server. But I never really joined. Like, I think I joined maybe once that summer, once or twice. Herm was slightly more into it than I was. And later that year, much later that year, after both me and Herm had been like banned from Mozart Realms, he came to me one day and was like, hey, I'm in this group on 2B2T. It's called the Vortex Coalition. And I've showed Coltsnid Dawnfear 9. And I think you should come to 2B2T with me and you can build a base with us. You can build Dawnfear 10. And he said, I think this can be something really big. We can get Voco people to come help build it with us. He kind of pitched the idea to me. And I was like, you know what? I think this is like a once in a lifetime opportunity. It's like the ultimate Minecraft challenge, quote unquote. So I took the jump and we built Dawnfear 10 in like December of 2016.
Yeah, why did you get banned off of Mozart server?
So I was hacking.
Wait, you guys were using clients? What clients were you guys using?
So Herm was hacking, and then I discovered he was hacking, and he kind of taught me to also hack. It was worst. Like
Oh
we were using
God,
worst.
yeah. I mean, Worst was reliable back in the day, and it still holds up. They have a version for everything, so
Yeah,
it's the one hack client you can get incredibly easily. It's like the dollar store brand hack client.
right, exactly.
But okay, so you met Herm, decided to move to 2B2T. What solidified your stake in the server? What made you want to stay from that point forward?
In the beginning, honestly, I was pretty on and off with it. As I said, I had joined a little bit that summer and then quit. But Herm actually had his own Anarchy server at this point in time. It was called Anarchy Heroes. That's a whole rabbit hole. But I was kind of playing that on and off. Like I would play 2B2T for a little while, a few months. I would leave and I would just go play Anarchy Heroes. Then I would come back, play 2B a little bit more. I was pretty on and off um, for a long time.
Yeah, and what experience on the server kind of made you decide, yes, this is where I want to move all my operations. This is where I want to be in the future. Like no other server is going to compare to this. What really sparked that for you?
Well, it that's a tricky question because I played 2B from 20 like December 2016 until probably April 2018. And then I actually left. I took Dawn Fuhr elsewhere and I played other Anarchy servers for a few years. And then I actually took almost the entirety of 2019 off without playing much Minecraft at all. So, and I didn't come back to 2B2T and stay until until 2020. But so yeah, like I was a 2B2T player and I had, hundreds of hours. I built Dawn Fuhr 10, 11, and 12. But even after all that, I was still not 100% sure the server was for me.
And
I was
why was that? What kind of gave you a bad taste in your mouth about staying on the server?
well, there's always been like this question because I see myself primarily as a builder, and I've gotten a lot better about this recently, but it's hard, when you put hundreds of hours into something and it kind of gets randomly destroyed. That's a tough reality to deal with. And so I was always going back and forth on it. I'm like, I really enjoy playing here. I think, some of the people are amazing. The kinds of things we can do here are incredible. But also it's all really temporary and I'm paying $20 a month for it. And, I would go back and forth on it. Um, but I was a Mason in 2017 and I was there when all of that stuff was started. And I built Dawn Fuhr 12 as like a Mason base, and so I was kind of in the thick of it for a while. But in late 2017, Hermetic Lock disbanded the Masons and kind of left without really explaining why, and that was a huge blow. And my time on the server waned after that, and I kind of kept doing smaller bases with Dawn Fuhr members uh, up until I finally decided to just take the group off the server.
Yeah, and you mentioned you were part of the Masons in 2017. What were those early days of the Spawn Masons like when it was just kind of like a brand new novel idea for Hermetic Lock?
It was an interesting time. A lot of the people, a lot of the people who were there back then are not actually Masons anymore. Um, like Alpha Computer was a Mason back then. Henry was a Mason back then. Um, the people are different. Another thing that was different is that like Fit was way more involved. Fit would actually just sit in VC and talk to us back then. I don't know how big his channel was. I think he had like 50,000 subs or something. Um, so that was an interesting experience. Like just being able to sit in a VC and talk to these people that were idolized or like famous or whatever. Both me and Herm had watched a bunch of YouTube videos about 2B before actually playing, and so when we started to like meet these people, it was like kind of an incredible experience. Um, I don't really, I wasn't really paying attention to the drama that ended up destroying them back in 2017, though. I was in my own bubble doing Dawn Fuhr 12. Like we had a channel in the Mason server for Dawn Fuhr 12, and that's kind of one of the only places I posted. I've always been a little bit introverted, So I just sort of stuck in that channel. I would talk occasionally. Um, I can't think of anything else to say.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's fine, that's fine. Um, and kind of like your opinion on Masons, like how they've changed since you originally joined them. Like how has the group changed over time?
I can't speak to how they are right now. I know that when I rejoined them in 2020, every single day was like a constant World War III level argument. And it was about stuff that I had no clue what it was. Like, it was about stuff that had happened in like late 2019 or some account authentication crisis where a bunch of members lost trust with each other because of that. And I don't know. There were a bunch of arguments that were constantly going on
What was probably the
when I
worst one?
rejoined. That was probably the worst point in time, or what was the worst argument?
Yeah, like what was kind of like the worst blowout that happened?
Uh, the one that resulted in Herm quitting.
Yeah, and what was your recollection around the events that transpired during that time?
So I was building the base, the COVID base. That was the Masons' only base at the time, and Herm was arguing with like Scribble Fox and a few other Masons. And basically, Herm was like, the rules are too strict. We don't get to do the kind of things that we used to do where we're more flexible with everything. So he made a separate Discord where apparently they like joked about cooing the Masons or I don't know, overthrowing negative entropy and restoring the old ways and blah blah blah, something like that. The Masons found out about this. The rest of the Masons, I mean, they were very mad. Some of them were saying it was like treason. And Herm's like, okay, well, I'm just going to take my toys and go home. Like, I don't know if they would have voted to kick him out or not, but they were all very mad. And it had reached a point with Herm where he was like, I detest what this has become, so I'm just going to leave. And I was very concerned at that point when that happened because Herm was kind of my best buddy in the Masons, and he was the person that always had my back. He was how I was even able to come back in the first place. Because I had left in 2018. I had been gone for like 3 years. When I come back in 2020, Herm was kind of the person that hooked me up and who got me back in there. So I was a little bit worried. I'm like, damn, is Herm like going down with the ship? Like, what's going on? But he bounced back with the guardsmen. And then essentially the base I was building got used as like a bonfire or something to start the new group. Like, I don't know how to phrase it. It got used as,
Yeah, what was that?
you know,
What was that?
the
What was that
guardsmen were built
like?
on the ashes of that base,
Yeah,
essentially.
you have such strong convictions and beliefs about griefing, right? Like you obviously didn't know how to feel about it towards the beginning. What was it like to do that to your own base, and was it worth it?
Yeah, that was a very hard choice. That was a very hard choice, even at the time. I wasn't sure if I was making the right decision at the time. Um, yeah, and we're talking specifically about I
Yeah, yeah,
can't
yeah.
remember the name. It's like COVID and the numbers. Um, my apologies to the people that have those numbers memorized. But yeah, that whole situation was tough for me. The goal had always been to try to get that base into a fit video or get it some kind of attention. Even before Herm left, me and Nick has cancer. Were talking about doing that. We were saying, yeah, we should like try to get this base into a fit video. And I think there's a DM that got leaked where I told him like I'd build for 2 more months and then we'll try to do something with it. But the trick is that fit will only ever cover something if there's drama. You can build the coolest base in the universe, but if there's no storyline there, he's not going to cover it. So we had to create some kind of drama, some kind of chaos, or something, so that Fit could weave a story. And Herm came to me one day after he had left the Masons and said, "Hey, I got Fit to agree to do this, but we have to destroy it." I'm like, "Well, shoot, I really don't want to destroy it, but also it'll be immortalized forever." So I made the trade-off. I decided that at the time anyway, that was worth it. It was really hurtful to a lot of the Spawn Masons, though. I wish I had better foresight as to how they were going to see it. I have actually apologized to a few of the Masons. I apologized to Nick and to Totorak for it, because I do actually kind of regret it. If I had a do-over, I would probably try to find a way to. I either wouldn't do it at all, or I would try to find a way to let them in on the plan somehow. Like get them on board with it, get them to be okay with it.
And by them, do you mean like all of the Spawn Masons, or just those specific people that you mentioned?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know necessarily if all of them needed to be, but at least the people who built there. I did build the vast majority of that base, but I wasn't the only one. I had done maybe 70% of it, So I did feel bad for the Masons that had built there, other than me. But a lot of the Masons who got mad about that were people who straight up never even went there. And for those people, I don't have any sympathy.
Yeah, and like, what's kind of your, like, after all the events that transpired, like what's kind of your standing with the Masons currently?
Yeah, I think everything's water under the bridge. It's been 2 years. I've certainly forgiven them for everything that they did afterward, and um, I think they're mostly over it too.
Yeah, and going forward from that situation, how you continued with Dawn Fuhrer, I want to kind of get some of your insight on the group itself. What are kind of the pros and cons of leading a group that large?
Uh, it can be incredibly rewarding because I don't know, when I look into a channel, or I look at like a base that we've started, and I see people building stuff and they're excited and they want to be part of Dawn Fuhrer. They're putting the banners everywhere. They're having a good time. Or when I see a bunch of people sitting in our VC and just chilling out, it's a good feeling. It feels like I'm building a positive community, and I'm contributing to the server being, I don't know, being a little bit less toxic, being a little bit more welcoming. I think the server maybe slowly getting less toxic, I think. And I'd like to think that maybe I'm contributing to that.
Yeah, and I mean nowadays, right? Like your application process, right, and the amount of members that you get into the group has changed exponentially from how it's been even a few years ago. Like what can you say
Yes.
about how you set up the application process, how it's different from other groups, and how it's allowed for players to join, whether making it easy and making it difficult, like how it works.
That's right. That's right. We completely overhauled how we did applications about 2 months ago. Initially, the way we did it was you would go to our website and you would go to the apply tab. That still works, but the application volume through that method was actually somewhat low. We would get, maybe 10 a week through that method. What we did was we simplified it. We made it so that now you join our public Discord and there's a bot and you click apply and the bot will actually DM you and ask you all of the application questions. And it will send us your response. And typically we will then interview that person and we click accept or deny and the bot will automatically send them an invite to the private server. Once they join that, they automatically get ranked and they get sent to one of our bases. That process, that new process that has been very streamlined, has totally exploded the number of applications we're getting. Especially when we first introduced it. There was like an insane flood of we were getting like 20 to 30 a day, and applications got backed up like 2 weeks. I think even now they're still somewhat backed up. I had to double the number of people who were handling applications on our team. And we've exploded in size. We reached 200 members a couple days ago.
And how do you deal with that massive amount of players, like dealing with some of the bad seeds that pop up and trying to figure out
Yeah,
who they are?
that's tough. And that ties into what you were asking about earlier with the drawbacks of leading a huge group. There's a lot of nonsense. There's a lot of annoying things that you have to deal with as a group leader. I think anyone who leads a group kind of knows this. A lot of these people, they're high schoolers, maybe not the most mature. So I have to put up with a lot of stuff. I think the key to handling it is ultimately patience. But I'd totally be lying if I said it was easy.
Yeah, and have there been any recent situations? I know something happened recently with BSB, that had been kind of like an overwhelming action to be done
Mm-hmm.
through a block game, right? Like, what was your perception on that situation?
On that, what happened specifically with them?
Yeah. Because I know you had a lot of strong opinions about it. When we talked about it, I kind of want to get
Yeah.
your public
So,
statement on everything that went down for those who might be unaware.
well, recently, BSB apparently had, they did like a pretty widespread attack on Dawnfure. They destroyed maybe 4 or 5 bases. Essentially, what happened is they had a couple different insiders that had infiltrated the group and had been in for several weeks. And in one particular person's case, like 2 months. And then they destroyed all the bases that those people had access to all at once. And then they lied and said that they had like a token logging exploit, which we found out later was nonsense. I don't know why anyone would go that far out of their way to just to blow shit up, but that's how it is on the server. That's just the kind of thing that you have to deal with. It was a learning experience, and we reformed our system. We changed how we do things a little bit. So,
Yeah, and
things are going to be better.
how have maybe not just that situation, but other situations like that changed your philosophy on how the game should be played, specifically 2B2T? Because I know you've had this long standing kind of belief about, as they say, community and building, right?
Yeah.
How has it kind of warped your perspective over the years?
Uh, well, I do think 2B2T is about community and building. I think that you build to create community primarily. I build a base because I want people to show up, because I want people to hang out, become friends. I want to see people sitting in that VC, you know. I want to build a community. And obviously griefing it's a necessary evil to some extent, because if a base is beautiful and amazing and huge and no one ever sees it because it never gets destroyed, it's kind of worthless at that point. It's like having gold bars like sitting under your mattress that you like can't spend or something. Or it's like having all this money stashed away that you can't spend. Ultimately every base has to end. So I understand that griefing is a necessary part of the server, and I think the longer I played 2B2T, I've gotten better at accepting and dealing with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of talking about you know co- community and building, right? More on the building aspect. Where did you kind of get your style of building from, your inspiration for the types of builds that you make?
So I honestly did not watch, like a lot of people, they'll go on YouTube and they'll watch build tutorials or something. And I did a little bit of that, years and years and years ago. But most of it has just been kind of self-taught. I've been doing this for over a decade, and so I'll learn little things here and there just by doing it. And when you build thousands and thousands of castles or houses or whatever, you typically get really good at that. And the principles that you learn while you are building, well, you learn through experimentation, but then those principles that you used for one style can actually apply to a bunch of other styles, because a beauty is sort of a universal thing. It's all geometry. It boils down to geometry and then detail and color. Those three things.
When did you stop making interiors in your builds? At which Dawn Fuhrer did that start happening?
uh, Dawn Fear 10.
And what kind of started that shift? Just immediately? Yeah, that was the one you got on Tubi with, right?
Yes, because
Really?
no one was living in the houses anymore.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Back when I was building on a faction server, people would actually live in the houses. Like I would put a sign on every single house that said "free house," and so if someone who was in the group wanted that house, they would put their name on the sign. But once you get to 2B2T, no one's using those. So I just didn't bother at that point.
Yeah, and what's kind of like what's the total number of Dawn Fuhrer bases that you've had so far, and which one has been your favorite to work on?
Are you talking about bases that got the Dawn Fear title, or
Yeah,
how many
just
bases we
every Dawn.
technically had? Or
Actually, you know what? We'll just say, tell me a full count of like the Dons, and then a full count of like bases total.
okay, so there have been 22 Dawn Fears currently, and then total number of bases that the group has ever had, that would be well over 100, probably something like 150.
And I mean, does this range from like spawn bases to larger like mega base type builds?
Yeah,
Like what
yeah.
what do you classify as a base on this list?
Well, I mean, it was anywhere that was intended to be a base. I mean, I'm not including like stashes or anything, but we've played on like 7 or 8 different servers over a period of almost 9 years now. So the numbers stack up. I know at one point somebody made a list. That's where I'm getting that number from. Somebody made a list, uh, and it was like every base I could remember, and it was something like 110 or something back then, and that was 2 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, have you ever considered making like a giant like master list or some sort of like like
Oh,
archive for. I
well,
mean, honestly, like Dawn Fury could have its own archive at this point for
it
the
would
amount
be
of
impossible
bases.
now because most of those are lost to time. Um, I don't even have like I don't have world downloads from anything prior to Dawn Fear 9
God, that's
because
crazy.
of just hard drive failures and because I didn't even know what world downloader was.
Yeah, and I mean, were there any bases that you never got the chance to save that you wish you would have?
Yes, Dawn Fear 14. We did not world download that before it was griefed. We have a world download after it was griefed.
Yeah, and speaking of griefs, I mean, obviously griefs kind of stem from people who have either backstabbed or decided that something was more rewarding than the experience they were getting already. Who are some of the people who have, despite all of that, stayed by your side consistently through it all that you want to shout out?
Yeah, we've had so many great people over the years. A lot of people who have come and gone just because of they get busy with real life and they can't be with us anymore. But some of the great Dawn Fear members, like there's a guy named Bad Company. He's actually one of the people that helped us overhaul the whole recruitment system. Um, but he had to leave recently because of IRL stuff. Uh, the guy named Zeiss, one of my best friends, been with Dawn Fear for 2 years now. Volker One, another elder helping me lead the group. Obviously, I have to shout out Ben, the guy who helped me start Dawn Fear to begin with, and Hermetic Lock was completely transformational. His effect on the group. If I had never met Hermetic Lock on Mozart Realms, I would never have come to 2B2T. Um, and there have been others. We've got people that have been with us for 6 years. There's a guy named Wygood who who joined us when he was like 11 or something. Like he lied about his age, and he just never VC'd, so no one knew that he was super young. But he's been with us for like half a decade, and he's just I don't know. It's weird when you've had someone in your group that long and you watch them grow up, and that's the kind of thing that happens when you have a group that's this old. Some of the people who do stick around, you see them change. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse.
Yeah, and,
Uh,
and speaking of change, like obviously the server's gone through a lot of change since you joined back in 2016. What was kind of how did you see like how have you seen it change over time, and where do you see it changing from now? Like how do you see it changing like going forward?
are you asking how the server was back in 2016 versus now?
Yeah, like how has it kind of transformed over the years, and how do you see it changing going forward?
Mm-hmm. So when Rusher joined the server, uh, a lot of people were. If you look at the early history of that time period, it's like basically factions. You've got the Rushers and the veterans, and there was like a team that had an America flag, and there was like Voco, and there were these big spawn battles where people used swords because crystals wasn't even a thing yet. And then the meta kind of evolved in 2017 and 2018. The meta no longer became conventional group, conventional building, conventional battles. Things evolved more heavily to focus on media because Fit really started to blow up. A whole bunch of other YouTubers were joining the server. Ant Venom, um, a few other big names joined, and it became clear that the media hype surrounding 2B was going to just continue. it wasn't just a one and done thing. It wasn't just rusher and then it goes back down. It was going to be uh, a continuous increase in popularity. So, and Hermetic Lock is really the first person to crack the code, so to speak, for the new meta of the server. And he did that with his spawn base, the Hermetic Lock world famous spawn base. At the time, it was a pretty revolutionary idea. It was just, we're going to start a base at spawn, the cords are going to be public, and we're going to rebuild it no matter how bad the griefing gets. That was kind of a unique thing. No one was really doing that at the time. But nowadays, if someone did that, it would be commonplace. That would be like, oh yeah, of course they're doing that. Like, no one would think twice about it if someone did that now. So the difference is the group meta is no longer focused around traditional base building, traditional doing things. It instead, especially in 2020 and 2021, which I would classify as the peak of this meta, groups became focused around gimmicks. And I don't mean that as an insulting thing. Some of these gimmicks are very cool, like pit fight, like team no trees or whatever.
Yeah, but it is definitely like an obvious
Oh
like
yeah, it's a
attempt,
gimme.
a vie to get into a fit video at this point.
Absolutely. Yeah, team no trees. The entire spawn logo building scene is entirely gimmicks. Like, what good is it if you build a spawn logo? Well, nothing other than that you might get some attention. Uh, and then like there were those weird people that did the crafting table biome, like all kinds of weird shit like that. And so, you know, so Herm cracked the code in 2017, and then from there he kind of merged it. He was like, I'm going to make a normal group called the Spawn Masons, but we're going to have this gimmicky thing where we meet at spawn once a week in a lodge. So he like merged the two ideas into one group. And that's part of why the Masons were a massive success, because they had the best of both worlds. They could make bases, they could do traditional group stuff, but also they had the like gimmicky thing that kept you coming back every week. But there was a huge explosion of these gimmick groups. II is probably the king of gimmick groups, just doing random spawn projects all the time. And that is beginning to decline. It has been in decline for, I would say, the entirety of this year and most of last year too. I would say basically since II died, it's been in decline. The future is going to be a return to the old ways of building something cool, of being like a traditional group with normal membership, with like ranks, with a group where your members are actually respected and you don't make them like slave away on a spawn logo, like. And so that's what I'm aspiring Dawnfear to be. We trust our members quite a bit more than an average group does, and that's because I believe in. I've never been someone who's liked the gimmicky nature of some of these other things people were doing, But that's the future. I think that is the future of where things are going.
Yeah, well, that's a very optimistic future. I hope that's how it comes to fruition. I mean, when I think back to how it was when I initially joined, sometimes I think, sometimes I wonder why I even still play. Because it's so vastly different. But I
When
think
did
I
you
think the I
join?
think the heart is still there in 2014.
Good
So
lord,
like yeah,
really?
like way back.
So
When it's
you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Then
it was
you've
just
seen
simple
this
base
change,
building. Like it felt so much smaller, right? Like it felt like a journey just traveling 2,000 blocks in the nether, right? Like it was
right?
like it was all base building, right? It was all these towns that had this story to them, this character, and I feel like we're kind of getting back to that point now that we've kind of exhausted everything there is to do in this version of Minecraft, to where it's like the root of it, the reason we started playing the server in the first place, is starting to shine again because we haven't given that attention. So I think you're absolutely correct.
Hmm.
And I can't wait to see how it unfolds in the future. D, thank you so much for being on. Do you have any closing statements before we wrap it up?
Not really. I appreciate it. It's a great opportunity.
Absolutely. You want to plug anything? Plug any?
Sure. If you're interested in community and building, you can join Dawn Fuhr. We have a public Discord server you can join, and we also have a website, www.dawnfuhr.com. You can access our Discord through there, videos, all kinds of stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Bizo.